Good evening, good afternoon, good morning. I need to go back on the issue of would boycotting the elections have been a better option in this case? Well, the argument is based on the fact that the electoral process is flawed. I think it is unbelievable that some people are finding it very difficult to understand the concept of free, fair, and credible elections. You can have elections, but it's not just a question of voting. If your vote does not count, then you've got to look at why. Because it is your fundamental right to have a meaningful say in the governance of the country. That means your vote must count. And this is where the concept of free, fair, and credible elections comes in. If the process is not free, fair, and credible, then your vote will not count. And when you look at the watershed 2008 elections, when on the March vote, when SADC had managed to force Zanu PF to accept a number of very significant reforms in the conduct of the elections, and the March 2008 elections were the nearest Zimbabwe has come to holding free, fair, and credible elections. In that vote, it became clear that the opposition was winning. But before the results could be announced, the Zanu PF vote rigging machinery was switched back on, and they hijacked the electoral process, stopped ZEC declaring the results, and then they took over and they started counting the votes. And there were only 5 million of them. But believe it or not, it took them 6 weeks to do so. And it has since expired that Morgan Tsvangirai had actually garnered 73% of the vote in that March vote. And that's when the Zanu PF vote rigging machinery was switched on. And after the 6 weeks, when the recounting, in this case, yes, of course, the withering of the 73% votes for Morgan Tsvangirai was whittled down to a respectable 47%, and thus below the 50% plus one to force the runoff. Everybody could see that recount was just a blatant cheating by Zanu PF. And during the runoff that followed, Zanu PF used wanton violence, the likes of which the country had never seen during the elections. That even SADC in the AU, we had in the past turned a blind eye to Zanu PF vote rigging addicts, could not pretend that was a free, fair, and credible process. And so they refused to give Zanu PF the legitimacy, and that's forcing the GNU. Now, this is where we are. What SADC done at that point was to say, we cannot accept these results because the process is so flawed. If winning 73% is not good enough to win the elections, then the process is flawed. And in this particular case, instead of saying, well, let's go to another election, no, let's correct the problem. Let's implement the democratic reforms to make sure that this does not happen again. And that's the crux of the matter here. The GNU of 2008 to 2013, its primary purpose was to implement the democratic reforms to stop the repeat of the 2008 rigged elections. That was the primary purpose. Alas, at the end of the GNU in 2013, it was clear that not even one token reform had been implemented. That is the reality. So it put the country back to where it was in 2008. Can you go ahead and have an election when the process is so flawed that even if you were to garner 73%, you would still not be declared the winner? The answer is no. This is totally meaningless. This is exactly what David Coltart was saying in his book, reference the 2013 elections, that the process was so flawed and illegal that the only logical, principled move was to withdraw from the elections. But he admitted in his book that he could not withdraw, or MDC-T and MDC-N could not withdraw from the race because they also knew that Zanu PF was going to give away a few gravity seats to entice the opposition to participate. And that is what they found irresistible. They had to participate because they found those seats being offered as a bribe irresistible. David Coltart is not the only CCC leader who has admitted that point, that it is futile to keep on participating in an election process in which, number one, you know the process is flawed, and number two, that by participating, you're only giving the vote rigging Zanu PF legitimacy, and thus perpetuating the dictatorship. I mean, that alone, you say to yourself, that is surely a situation where you've got to say, no, I can't participate. But the opposition are participating out of greed. Now, this brings us back to this election 2023. On the screen there are the 11 individuals who have successfully submitted their nomination papers for this coming presidential election. There are 11 of them. The front runners are Emmerson Mnangagwa and Nelson Chamisa. Now, some of us have argued that the opposition should not participate. The Nelson Chamisa supporters have come out with guns blazing that, oh no, the CCC should continue participating, because even if they withdraw, the others will participate and give Mnangagwa legitimacy. This is a flawed argument. In 2018, there were altogether 23 presidential candidates. According to ZEC's results, Mnangagwa won 50.8% of the vote, which translated to 2.4 million votes. Chamisa came second with 45% of the vote, or nearly 45% of the vote. And then the other remaining 21 candidates, between them, they got under 4%, just over 4% of the vote. It is, of course, ridiculous to argue if the Chamisa and his group had boycotted the 2018 elections, that would have been ignored. If you've got 45% of the following of the votes, how could it be ignored? Of course, it couldn't be ignored. That's nearly half of the voting populace saying, no, we can't participate in these elections. Whereas if one of the other smaller candidates had participated with less than 1%, surely that would have gone unnoticed. So the argument here is that the main opposition should have taken the lead in boycotting these elections. But even if we put aside the size of CCC, even if we say of the 11 candidates we see before us now, they are all going to poll roughly the same number of votes. So if one of the opposition, one or two of the opposition were to drop out, it would hardly be noticeable. Even that, if that was the case, the argument here is, number one, participating, you will not change anything. The results are already fixed. This is such a flawed process. You cannot possibly win. Number two, by participating, you are giving the process legitimacy. Those issues alone are matters of logic and principle. Of course, you can stand on your own as a principled individual. You should be able to stand on your own and say, I don't care what everybody else says. You stand up on your principles because this is the most rational thing to do. It is totally irrational to participate in an election process which will only give vote rigging Zanu PF legitimacy and perpetuate the suffering of the ordinary person. As a matter of principle, you stand and say, no, I'm not going to participate. What I find amazing here is the number of CCC supporters. We even are going to the extent of trying to come up with a narrative, a spin, to suggest that CCC are participating in these flawed elections, knowing the two things that we've already agreed on, that Zanu PF is rigging, and number two, that by participating, you're giving legitimacy to the regime and perpetuating the suffering of the people. Knowing all that, they want to try to convince us that, yes, CCC has still got to participate because by participating, they are somehow doing the ordinary person a favor. That is the most ridiculous argument one can present. Absolutely nonsensical. This comes to the individual, the private individual, the ordinary citizen out there. I repeat, these elections are so flawed that it is nonsensical to argue that I've got a right to vote. The right you have is a fundamental right to have a meaningful vote. And you do not defend, when you lost that right, you do not defend it by participating to give legitimacy to a flawed process. That's totally nonsensical. By participating in a flawed process, you are giving it legitimacy. How can that be you exercising your democratic right to vote? And I think in this particular case, those people should also understand that by doing so, what you're doing is you're undermining the national goal of getting reforms implemented so that you can restore your right, everybody, not just you, everybody's right to a meaningful vote. As an individual, I think most people, except for those aspiring for leadership, either now or in the future, for the rest of the ordinary Zimbabweans, you're just shooting yourself in the foot. I can't think of anything more pathetic than participating in a process in which you give vote rigging, Zanu PF legitimacy, and perpetuate the Zanu PF dictatorship and your own suffering. That's the most nonsensical position anyone can take. Most people are participating in these elections, ignoring the 3 points that we have made. That number one, Zanu PF is rigging. Number two, that by participating, you're only giving Zanu PF legitimacy. And number three, that you're perpetuating your own suffering. They want to believe that these elections, flawed as they are, they can still win them because they believe in Chamisa's promise that he has got winning in rigged election strategies. One of which, or the flagship of which, was we will have mass voter registration followed by mass voting, and then we protect the vote. Well, the first part of that strategy, the mass voter registration, has already failed, because as of 30th of May last year, ZEC announced that only 250,000 new voters had registered. And yet, CCC had been campaigning and claiming that they were going to have 6 million new voters registered. In other words, as of May last year, they'd only managed to register 4%. Even if we assume that 250,000 were all CCC supporters, they'd only managed to register 4% of their target. So the whole strategy was dead. This issue of protecting the vote, we still have to hear from CCC. One way they claim they're going to do that is to make sure that they'll have got an election agent at every polling station. We understand this year there's going to be 12,000 polling stations. In 2018, there were just over 11,000 polling stations. And it turned out that MDC alliance then, led by Nelson Chamisa, failed to have even one election agent at 544 of the polling stations. 544. So at those polling stations, Zanu PF was able to do as it pleased. And so the argument that will protect the vote, if you don't even have an election agent at a polling station, I don't see how you can claim that we are protecting the vote. And let's make it very clear here that those election agents, particularly in the rural areas where Zanu PF bullying is unbelievable, will be bullied to the point where I would not want to be an election agent for the opposition. Because the regime and its thugs will be after you. If the regime and its thugs is harassing election candidates, what more election agents? And to have one election agent at a polling station is, yes, okay, symbolically you've got somebody there, but I don't think they can really effectively monitor what is going on. Particularly when you think that Zanu PF election agencies will be there, and then the election officials themselves, the SEC officials, they've got two caps. Publicly, they are wearing their SEC official cap, but in reality, they are Zanu PF in all but name. The security details, the police, and all the other individuals who have been recruited to help with the election process itself, most of them will be in Zanu PF's pockets. How you can expect one election agent to monitor all those people beggars belief. So this issue of we are protecting the vote is a myth. The vote rigging is being done as we speak right now. ZEC has failed to produce a verified voters roll, for instance. How can you have an election without a verified voters roll? But that's what we have. These parties are participating in these elections knowing fully well that these elections are flawed. And honestly, the only rational thing to do would have been to boycott these elections. And as for the ordinary citizen, there is nothing to be gained by participating in a process that you know is flawed. And by participating, by the way, at the end of the day, you cannot turn around and claim the elections were rigged because you knew that. You knew that all along and you still participated. This comes back to our voter beware, similar to buyer beware. If you participate knowing all these things, you cannot complain afterwards that the process was flawed. No, you cannot do that. That is the reality. And to participate in a process which you know from the word go that is flawed, which you know from the word go that by participating you're only giving legitimacy to this Zanu PF regime, And that from the word go, by giving Zanu PF legitimacy, are perpetuating your own suffering. Well, that is the height of insanity. And those who want to give the impression that somehow Nelson Chamisa is and his company are participating in this and that they are doing us a favor, is the most idiotic argument one can give. Of course, they're not doing us a favor. They are doing it out of greed. And they know it, and they admit it. We are in a serious situation here. Zimbabwe is in a mess. Zimbabwe is a failed state. Part of it is to do with the leadership, but part of it is also to do with us, the ordinary Zimbabweans. We have proven to be incredibly naive and gullible. And as long as we remain naive and gullible, the country is not going to get out of this mess. If we participate in these elections and give Zanu PF another 5 years, then we have got only ourselves to blame for it. It is not too late to complain and dismiss this process for what it is, a farce. It is not too late to tell the opposition they are participating out of greed, which is true. And it is not too late for the ordinary Zimbabwean out there to say, no, I'm not participating in these elections and perpetuate my own suffering. It is insane. We need to stop this insanity. And the first step is recognizing our own insanity. Participating in these flawed elections, which is already clear. The whole process is flawed. There's no way this can be a free, fair, and credible election. And you only participate when you have participated. It's you cannot complain afterwards. And once you've participated, they've given the process legitimacy. You cannot complain afterwards. After 43 years of rigged elections, we need to come to our senses and stop this insanity. And that starts by us accepting that this is insane. There's no other way for it. The 11 individuals there contesting these presidential elections, they're doing it out of selfish greed. Zanu PF knows that by rigging the elections, they are assured of retaining absolute power. The opposition are participating, knowing fully well that Zanu PF is rigging the elections, knowing fully well that by participating, they're giving Zanu PF legitimacy, but they also know that Zanu PF is offering a few seats to those who participate. And that is good enough for them. I think the recognition that that is what has dragged the country into this mess is imperative. We, as the citizens, we cannot continue to play our part and endorse such a system. I think we need to stand up and say, no, this is enough is enough. There is nothing, absolutely nothing for the ordinary Zimbabwean to gain out of participating in these elections. Nothing. So why are we doing it? To keep on believing in Chamisa's oxymoronic nonsense that he has got winning in rigged election strategies is it's laughable. And for a country that is in serious trouble, we cannot afford those idiotic jokes. We need to come to our senses, my fellow Zimbabweans. That is the message I'm trying to leave with you tonight. You cannot be master of your own destiny if you cannot even have the common sense to realize that participating in an election that is so flawed that 73% is not good enough to win the elections, and to keep on participating after 43 years of rigged elections is insane. Well, if you don't snap out of your insanity, this nation is not getting out of this mess. That I can rest assure you. Thank you and good night.